Alright, so let's wrap up Lecture 9 here with this last chunk. This is going to be a relatively short chunk, far shorter than the others. We're going to wrap up Chapter 15 here and not really talk about redox reactions at all, but instead focus our energies on how to drive reactions that are unfavorable, or in other words, reactions that have a positive delta G, how to drive those reactions forward in a biochemical context. So we've already talked about standard states for chemical reactions, and we've talked about catabolism and anabolism in general. That led us to a fairly robust discussion on redox reactions, and we talked about NAD and FAD and all that goes with it as well. So here we'll talk about this idea of coupling reactions to achieve overall negative delta Gs, and how to make an unreactive molecule do chemistry, how to activate an unreactive molecule, and coenzyme A will be our example for that. So first, coupling reactions. I've already told you that when we oxidize something, when we steal electrons from something, we are releasing energy in the form of those electrons that we've stolen. But that released energy is kind of worthless to us unless we can trap it. If we're just releasing energy, we're releasing heat, and heat doesn't make ATP for us. So we have to simultaneously release electrons and release energy and capture them. Eventually, we'll move that captured energy into ATP by using that energy to make ATP, but that's for later. ATP contains a high energy bond. When we break that bond, we'll release the energy. That's all fine and good. But we need to take the building blocks of that. We need to take ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and add a phosphate to it to create adenosine triphosphate, and that's how we will store energy. Therefore, once we've made ATP, once that energy is needed for some type of anabolic biological process, once we need to build something, we can just release that energy from ATP by cleaving or hydrolyzing that last phosphate and creating ADP and energy. So you can think of ATP as the cellular battery. The battery is charged when ATP levels are high. That's a lot of stored energy that we can tap into whenever we want. As we tap into that energy and release it and use it, the battery depletes. In other words, we start making more and more ADP. And when all we have around in a cell is ADP, that means we've tapped into all of our energy. The battery is dry, and the cell really has one of two options: die, which it doesn't want to do, or recharge its battery by making more ATP. So this ATP, this energy released through electrons, charging of ATP by making ATP, using that energy from ATP and then having to recharge it again, this is an ongoing cycle. And we can pretty much represent that cycle by returning to our basics of metabolism. The food we eat, along with the oxygen we breathe in, becomes as a byproduct carbon dioxide, which I told you we'll talk about later, and the water we exhale. Along the way, we've done a lot of oxidative processes, which means we've stolen a lot of electrons. If we've stolen a lot of electrons, we've stolen a lot of energy. That energy is used to charge our ATP batteries and convert ADP into ATP. Now we have a lot of energy stored and on hand. But we need that energy. We need that energy to do anabolic things, like build the molecules we need to survive. So if we're going to build things, we need energy. We use the energy of ATP, and we deplete it back to ADP. But at least we got to build the things we need to live. But since we use all that energy for building things, our batteries are dry. We have to recharge it. Well, the only way we can recharge it is with energy from new electrons. And the only way we can get those new electrons with new energy is by consuming more food. And so in a very real way, food is fuel. Food is the energy we need to survive. So eating releases energy by oxidation. We store and ship that energy around the body as ATP. And then we release that energy from ATP in order to do anabolic things, such as building the biomolecules we need to survive. Along the way, we're going to have some problems, however. Along the way, we are going to have reactions that we need to occur that just don't want to occur. Reactions we're going to have to force, if possible. Luckily for us, if ever we have two reactions that are linked by a shared product reactant, in other words, if the product of one reaction is the reactant of another, those two reactions can be coupled. In simplest consideration, we can think of energy itself as the coupling product. This reaction, A and B, comes together to create C, D, and energy is released. That energy can be recaptured by the second reaction, where E and F with that energy can combine to make G and H together. You can realize in this example that the second reaction is endergonic. It has a positive delta G. It is not spontaneous. This reaction needs energy to occur. Therefore, it won't occur under normal circumstances. But if reaction number 1 is occurring nearby, the energy released by reaction number 1 can be used to feed reaction number 2, and both reactions can occur. In this case, these reactions are said to be coupled. Now, from an energetics perspective, coupled reactions have a very interesting property. The delta G of the two coupled reactions together is simply the sum of the individual delta G's for the individual reactions. We can say that a little bit more clearly. If you have an unfavorable reaction with a positive delta G, and you couple it to a favorable reaction, that's a reaction that gives up energy and has a negative delta G, and if those two reactions together have an overall negative delta G, all two of those reactions will happen and it will be thermodynamically favorable. The universe will happen. So if you have a reaction where the delta G is positive 5, the universe hates that and does not want that to occur. But if the reactant for that positive 5 reaction is the product of a reaction with a negative 7 delta G, you can couple those two reactions together. Your overall delta G will be a negative 2 because the combination of negative 7 and positive 5 is negative 2. The universe is happy, it's getting negative 2 units of energy. The exergonic reaction occurred because it was spontaneous, but the endergonic reaction occurred as well due to coupling. So the universe will tolerate a positive delta G reaction occurring as long as it is sufficiently offset by an even larger negative delta G that it is coupled to. In other words, you have to bribe the universe. And this is how the body gets reactions to occur that wouldn't otherwise be favorable. It literally skims energy off the top, like profits from a Las Vegas casino, and gives that skimmed energy to the universe as a bribe. You can think of coupled reactions as this way. Imagine this was my house. It's not my house, but imagine this was my house. And I need a favor. I need you to do me a favor. Tight bind, kids are busy, too much going on. I need you to walk my dog. And you say, okay, doesn't sound bad. And here's my dog. No problem, right? You don't mind walking my dog around town? Who wouldn't mind being seen with a dog like this? And you say, you know, it's starting to feel kind of positive delta G-ish to me. I don't really think I want this to happen. I say, okay, wait. I know the dog looks weird, but if you walk the dog for me, I'll buy you 2 tickets to whatever movie you want to see. It's on me. That's what I'm going to do for you. Well, and maybe you begin to weigh that and you say, okay, well, I don't want to walk this silly-looking dog. So that's a very unfavorable reaction. But he's offering me 2 free movie tickets, and there's a movie I really want to see right now. That's a negative G, favorable reaction. But the only way I can get the tickets is to walk the dog, so they're coupled. And you say, okay, fine, I'll do it. I'll do something I don't want to do in order to get something I really want. And that's exactly what's happening in the biochemistry here. The unfavorable reaction that doesn't want to occur, air quotes, doesn't want to occur, is occurring because it's coupled to a reaction that is very favorable and does occur spontaneously. And those 2 delta G's of those 2 reactions combine together, and as long as the total overall delta G is negative, the reaction will occur. That's the movie. So moving on then from coupled reactions to activating molecules, we again will use coenzyme A as an example here. But as we've already said a few times, when we oxidize food molecules, when we harvest electrons from food molecules in order to harvest energy from it, we got a lot of steps going on. We got a lot of biochemistry that's going to occur along the way. And as I've already said, sometimes those reactions are unfavorable. Sometimes they have positive delta G's, but we have a strategy now by which we can combat that. We can couple reactions to drive unfavorable reactions forward. Sometimes, though, it's not the delta G's that are the problem. Sometimes the reactant molecules we need to work with simply are non-reactive. They're completely content. They have no reactivity at all. They just don't want to engage in chemistry. In these cases, what we can do is we can force a non-reactive molecule to become reactive by linking it to a coenzyme. Biochemically, once the bond between the formerly unreactive molecule is broken from its bond with the coenzyme, energy is released, and we can use that energy of reaction, we can use that reactive energy to force our molecule to do whatever we wanted it to do. The example here is molecule A is very unreactive. It doesn't want to engage in chemistry. It's content. It's inert. But if we can force molecule A to link up with a coenzyme, now molecule A is very unhappy. The reason why molecule A is very unhappy is the coenzyme is very reactive. So it's almost like we've paired up molecule A with the worst blind date ever. And they're forced to be together through this covalent bond, but molecule A is very unhappy. And an unhappy molecule is a reactive molecule. So we call this the activation step because we took an inert molecule that didn't want to do anything, and now we've made it antsy. We've made it antsy to leave this horrible date. We've made it antsy to get away from the coenzyme. So now we wave molecule B in front of molecule A. Now molecule B is not a molecule that A would ever give the time of day. Remember, A was content being alone. It was completely non-reactive. But now you wave molecule B around and A is like, oh man, B looks pretty good compared to coenzyme. I'll do anything to get out of this blind date. And so A now behaves as a reactive molecule, breaks its bond with the coenzyme, and links up with B. A being linked with B is far more favorable than A being linked to coenzyme. We have fooled A into being reactive by pairing it with something it so desperately didn't want to be paired with. And now any other chemical alternative is favorable from the one that it was in before. Making inert, non-reactive molecules reactive in this way is chemically called activation steps. And the most common coenzyme that we will encounter that's used for this purpose is called coenzyme A, or CoA for short. CoA is used to activate lots of different molecules to make reactions occur that wouldn't otherwise occur. The most common example of this that we will encounter in just a little bit is a molecule called acetyl-CoA. Acetyl is a very content molecule, very solitary molecule, very happy being acetyl and doesn't want to be anything else. But we need acetyl to link up with other molecules in order to drive metabolism forward. So to make that happen, we force acetyl to interact with CoA, creating acetyl-CoA, and only then will acetyl do what we want it to and continue on with glucose metabolism. So this is what CoA looks like. It's a huge molecule. It ends in a thiol group. That thiol group provides a good deal of the reactivity of CoA. It's that thiol group that makes CoA reactive, makes the bond that CoA makes with some non-reactive molecule reactive. And it's through this reactive CoA-thiol bond that we can force molecules to become antsy. When that bond is broken, energy is released, negative delta G, and now we can link to coupling because that energy of that release can be used to drive unfavorable reactions forward as well. So to summarize what we covered in this last chunk here, we talked about coupling as a way to combine multiple reactions to achieve overall delta Gs that are positive. And in this way we can drive endergonic reactions forward as long as we can sufficiently couple them with exergonic reactions that have larger negative delta Gs. And we also talked about activation steps where we can fool a non-reactive molecule into engaging in chemistry as long as we first link it to an activating coenzyme that makes it very, very unhappy. So I think the stage is set now. We've got everything in our back pocket that we need in order to move forward directly into metabolism. The next lecture is going to focus on carbohydrates, sugars, just so we know the lay of the land of what we're going to be metabolizing. But as soon as we understand sugars and have that in our back pocket as well, we'll be off to the races with glucose metabolism. Until then, thanks for watching.